Penny from Heaven by Jennifer L. Holm, Chapter 18. The Last Person on Earth. I decide that when it comes right down to it, people like a good tragedy. Like my father dying. One day he was writing for the newspaper, eating my mother's roast chicken, and the next day he was sick. He died, they buried him, and everyone was real sad. But me they don't know what to do with anymore. The operation was successful, but my arm still doesn't work. My visitors always seem confused about how to act. It's pretty clear I'm not going to die, but they don't know how upset to be. After all, you can't hold a funeral for a dead arm or visit it in Shady Grove Cemetery. All the kids who were here when I came in are gone, except the cancer girl, who's hanging on longer than anyone thought. We hear about a new boy on the isolation ward who's got polio. The nurses talk about him, how he's in an iron lung. They're even saying that his mother thinks he got it from the pole. When Frankie comes by to visit, we play gin rummy. I'm feeling cranky. I'm sick of this place, but that isn't the only thing that's bothering me. I keep expecting Uncle Dominic to show up, but he doesn't. He hasn't visited me once the whole time I've been in here. Even some of the girls from school who don't talk to me sent a card. Stop losing on purpose, I say after I win the fourth game in a row. What? Frankie says with an innocent look. Why won't Uncle Dominic visit me, I ask. Is he all right? I don't know. Frankie, I say. He holds up his hands. I don't. Nobody knows where he is. He's disappeared. Took his car, nobody's seen him since the day you got hurt. You gotta find out where he went, I say. The next morning when Frankie comes in, he's wearing a triumphant smile. I got the goods all right, he announces. Well, I demand. He's in Florida, he says. Florida? I think he's a ruthless killer now, Frankie says. What are you talking about? I ask. He lowers his voice. It explains everything. You know, why he lives in his car and all that. Killers can't have a permanent address. Where'd you hear that? Around. Frankie, you gotta stop reading those crime comics, I tell him. He leaves and I lie in bed holding the lucky bean in one good hand, trying to picture Uncle Dominic standing on the beach in Florida, staring out at the ocean. No matter how I look at it, I just don't understand. How can one of the most important people in your life disappear like he was never really there? I watch my mother talking to the doctors in the hallway. My Gregory Peck doctor says something and her shoulders slump. She doesn't say a word when she comes over to my bed, but I see it in her eyes. It looks like she's trying to hold back tears. That's when I know it's all over, that my arm is never going to work. Just like that. You can have my bike, I tell Frankie when he comes by later that day. I can, he asks, excited. Then he realizes that this doesn't make much sense. He looks at me suspiciously. Nah, he says. What do I want a girl's bike for anyway? We'll be riding it in no time. You watch. I look away from him out the window. Come on, he says, picking up the pudding from my lunch tray and starting it in on it. Knock it out with the sourpuss. Frankie eats the rest of my lunch and tries to get me to laugh at some stupid joke he heard, but I don't, and finally he gives up and leaves. You feeling okay, hun? Miss Simpkins asks, putting her hand on my forehead. Can I have a pain pill, please? Sure, sweetheart, she says. I'll be right back. When the fuzzy feeling hits my blood, I close my eyes and block out the sounds of the ward. I imagine I'm someone else, some other girl who has a regular life, who has 2 working arms, the girl I used to be. They move the cancer girl's bed next to mine so she can have a friend, which is just what I need, seeing as how she's going to die any day now. She's only 8 and her name is Gwendolyn, but she says to call her Gwenny. Gwenny has a sad-looking, nearly bald doll that she calls Annabelle and keeps in bed with her. You sure got a lot of family, Gwenny says after a pack of the uncles leave one afternoon. She just has a mother and father who visit her. Yeah. You Italian, she asks. Half, I say. I like pizza, she says, but my mother says we can only have it as a treat. After that, I give her all the food that the relatives bring, and for a girl who's dying, she sure has a healthy appetite. When you get out of here, you should go over to my Nonnie's house. She'd love you, I tell her. How come? You're a good eater, I say. I'm not getting out, Gwenny says. I don't say anything to that. Your arm, she asks. Is it going to work again? What's the point of lying? I say. No, I say. She dies 2 days later. I send back my meal trays untouched. The nurse says something to my mother. Bunny, my mother says, you have to eat something. I'm not hungry, I say. It seems like everyone and their uncle starts showing up with food. Mimi brings the tuna casserole, Mother brings roast chicken, and Frankie stops by with a bag of fresh donuts. Aunt Gina brings macaroni, Uncle Ralphie brings candy from the store, Uncle Polly brings filet mignon, and Uncle Sally brings a box of Follitel, but I don't touch any of it. I just can't. Nani appears in the doorway the next day, right before dinner. She's wearing a black dress and carrying a plate of pasteria. She sits in the chair next to my bed, looking like a black angel against all the white of the hospital. Tesoro mia, she says, eat. Something in her voice makes me open my mouth before I have a chance to shut it. She pops a piece of pasteria in it like I'm a baby, and it tastes so good, like it's the best thing I've ever eaten in my whole life. She feeds me another piece, and I keep waiting for her to burst into tears. But she just looks at me, her eyes so sad, and I don't know what it is, but the tears start rolling down my cheeks. And once I start, I can't seem to stop. And pretty soon I'm crying for everything. For my arm, for Scarlett O'Hara, for Gwenny, for Uncle Dominic, for my poor dead father, for the great big mess my life has become. I bawl so hard, you'd think rivers would flood and houses would float away. I cry and cry and cry, and Nani just holds me tight. Her two strong arms are the only things keeping me from drowning in it all. I'm staring out the window. Penny, Miss Simpkins says to me, you have a visitor. Mr. Mulligan is standing in the doorway, a newspaper tucked under one arm and a paper bag in the other. He's the last person on earth I expected to see here, especially after how I've behaved. He doesn't seem to think anything's unusual because he just drags up a chair beside my bed and pulls out a container of ice cream from the paper bag. I heard you like buttered pecan, he says. I'll get some bowls and spoons, Miss Simpkins says with a smile. Mr. Mulligan's not like any of the other visitors. He doesn't want to know how I feel or whether I'm tired I tried my arm that day. He doesn't ask if I need something to drink or eat. He just unfolds the newspaper and starts reading to me out loud from the sports section. His voice is deep and lulling. The Brooklyn Dodgers. I close my eyes and listen. Mr. Mulligan comes every day after his milk deliveries and reads the paper from cover to cover. We start with the sports section and then go on to local news and then to the obituaries, which are more interesting than you would think. After this, we move on to the funny section. Mr. Mulligan uses all sorts of silly voices to act out the characters. He does a great Blondie and Dagwood. Our favorite section is the police blotter. In the last week alone, there's been one bicycle theft and a missing pet, and Mrs. Angus Sloth reported seeing an unusual man peeping in her front window. We both agree that the police chief sure has his work cut out for him keeping up with the local criminals. Mr. Mulligan's an interesting fella. Before becoming a milkman, he was in the Air Force and was stationed in Burma during the war. He says the worst part was after the war was over. Took us nearly a year to get home, he says. A whole year, I ask. We didn't even get a plane ride back. Can you believe that? We had to take a ship, and it took 33 days. The Japanese had put all these floating mines in the ocean to blow up the American ships. We had to go right through them to get back home. What'd you do, I say? There were minesweepers. They'd clear the mines so the ship could get through. Sounds dangerous, I say. One time, I was sleeping below decks, and I guess the captain thought that we'd clear the mines, and I heard all this shouting. I ran up on deck to see what was going on. Turns out the minesweepers missed one, and this mine was floating right toward us. Really? Right at you? He nods. All the boys on deck were shooting at it, but they were so nervous and shook up they kept missing it. What happened? Well, this Marine came running up with his gun and stood there, calm as can be, and took one shot, and bam! He got it. Holy moly, I say. Just goes to show you that you should always keep a Marine around, he says and chuckles. I'll remember that, I say. I look at Mr. Mulligan with his balding head and kind eyes. I'm glad there was a Marine on your ship, I tell him. Me too, he says and smiles. End of chapter 18.